You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Hi, Justin.
Good morning, Allison. How are things going over there?
Ooh, well, we have a new patient in the house.
Oh, no.
Winston the dog.
Ah.
Right? I know. I just remember the day, and I should have knocked on all the things. And, I don't totally believe that, but also I will take anything I can get.
Oh, yeah.
One day when you were talking about I fill up Sarah's pillbox and my pillbox and the dog's pillbox. And I was like, haha, my dog doesn't take any medication. Well, 5 minutes later, right? All the things.
Right.
So, Winston the dog this week, a couple days ago, injured his foot. We're not totally sure how. He sliced it open. And so what that has meant is emergency vet visit, and then staples, and now 2 extra medications, possibly 3 at some point, and then wound care. And it just, so you just have to laugh, right? So it's
right.
like me digging through our closet and going into our dermatology surgery bucket, because every time Sean has a Mohs procedure, they give us this bag full of gauze and tape and all the things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then pulling that out, but for the dog. Or pulling out the pill crusher, but for the dog.
Right.
And it's just messes with your head, I tell you.
Yeah.
It really does. Somebody said that the other day that they had to take their dog in for this, whatever. And then it triggered all this medical trauma for her because she was a caregiver for her husband. And it's yeah.
Right.
So, and I think a big thing that has been really hard about these last couple of days with him being injured is he's just such a lovely presence in this household. He's a thing that we all come together around, and he's just such a joy.
Yeah.
And so seeing him in this sort of sad, out of it, in pain state has just changed the whole chemistry of the household.
Yeah, for sure.
And that feels really sad and hard. And also it's can't caregivers of humans, can we get a free pass? Can we be okay,
right,
because you're dealing with this thing, you shouldn't have this other thing?
Yep.
I wish that we could invent that. No flooded basements, no injured dogs.
Right.
Things like that shouldn't happen.
Correct.
Because we already have our plate. But apparently the other life thing continue happening on top of the already full plate. Someone commented, your plate just always seems to be full. Why, yes, it does. Yeah. Thanks for noticing. That's true. Yeah. So luckily, should I even say this? I don't know. Luckily, Sean's been doing quite well.
Oh, good.
The last couple of weeks. Do I even dare say it? By the time this episode's released, we'll be in the ER or something. Just watch. But anyway, he's been doing quite well. So that has been helpful.
Good.
So focus on Winston. But it's also exciting times around here. My daughter just had her big school musical. She's a senior, and then next week is the prom.
Oh, wow.
And then June 4th, I think, is graduation. And then we're having a graduation party.
Right.
And then we have orientation for college. And so it just feels like a really exciting, lots of exciting, fun things.
Okay.
And also just okay, let's just get through, just get done, just get out of there, just be just finish. So not that there's fear of that, but
right.
I think we'll all feel better when the diploma is in hand,
Good.
So yeah. How about over there? What's going on with you?
Well, Sarah and I were able to celebrate yesterday. This week we had our 15th wedding anniversary.
Oh, happy
exciting.
Anniversary.
Thank you. And so yesterday we were able to go out to one of our favorite restaurants.
Oh.
A place that I don't think we've gone in and eaten at since before Sarah got sick. It's if you remember the story, there's this, I think I've talked about it here. When she was starting to feel a little bit like we could start tagging something on to appointments. When we would drive to Bellingham and have an appointment, we went and we at the end of the appointment, we got to the car, we called in an order to this restaurant. We drove there, picked it up, ate it in the car.
Yeah.
And so that's this restaurant. It's an Italian
But
place.
you got to go inside.
And it was just delightful. And then we stopped and picked up some ice cream afterwards at this little ice cream shop. And it was just a wonderful like evening that felt like normal. It felt like it feels good to celebrate, 15 years together.
Yeah. And to
really
celebrate
nice.
it in that way that you were able to do that. And
right.
And how far away from your house was this restaurant?
About 30 minutes. Yeah.
So even that's a big deal, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that she could handle a 30-minute car ride,
Mm-hmm.
dinner and ice cream, and a 30-minute ride home. Like a year ago, 2 years ago, absolutely not, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Are you both like in the noticing? I mean, I hear you noticing that and
right.
appreciating that, right? Does she appreciate and notice that as well?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Oh, I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
And it's just like I think that that's the thing with us in these hard lives is that it increases our awareness of the good things.
Right.
Like in your previous life, you'd be like, it's our anniversary. We go out to dinner, we get ice cream, we go home. Like, no big deal. Cool. That's just what we do. But now you're like, look what we did. Right.
Yeah.
And so to really appreciate that. So, I'm happy for you both.
Yeah.
And happy anniversary. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back to the podcast here.
Yeah.
This week we're going to talk about boundaries. And I'll just be upfront that as someone who personality-wise is very like conflict averse, like a peacemaker kind of person, wants everything to like be in harmony with everything around me and like feels discomfort when things get tense. Yeah, I feel a little unease about talking about this topic. I feel that like tension inside me, like because it's something that, I think for some people, personality-wise, maybe it's a much easier thing to be like, this is where there needs to be a boundary. I'm asserting that, like,
sure,
that's me, and like I can do that easily. And for me, it's it feels a little bit fraught just because of that. I think I read into things as conflict that are not conflict. Like having a discussion about something where like things aren't going one way and I want them to be a different way, like that, my mind pre-interpretates that as conflict and I feel that discomfort. So I don't know how you relate to this kind of topic, but that's kind of how I'm coming into this discussion.
Yeah. Well, thank you you just set up a boundary. Look at you. Oh. You just kind of did that, right?
Wow.
I mean, you were like really honest about here's what I need and here's how I'm feeling, which is the first step.
Great.
So look at you. Do you feel discomfort around talking about this because like, are you worried that I'm going to be like, Justin, you need to set some boundaries? Or do you just like not even want to like, does it feel hard to even talk about this subject because it's hard for you? Like what part of it feels uncomfortable just having the conversation?
I think just the concept a little bit feels like, I think there's two pieces. I think the just boundaries feel like something that is stressful for me to, particularly if I was in a situation where I had to like enforce a boundary, like that feels real stressful.
Yeah.
But that's like an important part of having a boundary. And I think the other piece is like, there's a fear that in having this discussion about boundaries, like I'll say something that could be interpreted by someone listening that like I'm talking about them or like giving an example that like somehow gets read the wrong way.
Sure.
In a topic like this. And so that's kind of the two ways that I'm coming into this feeling.
Well, should we just put out a disclaimer that all examples that will be given by Justin today are generic.
They're purely hypothetical.
And no one listening is being named.
Right.
I wonder if this kind of feels like if we were doing like a discussion on like exercising or like eating right. And we were like, oh crap, I haven't been doing that. And I know I should be. And now we're about to talk about this thing that I should probably be doing for like 60 minutes and why it's good for. You know what I mean? Like, does it feel like that at all?
Not quite. Like I feel like I did some research and read into some stuff about caregiving and boundaries. And so I have some notes. I feel prepared to like have a discussion. And so I think it's going to be good. I think it's an important thing to talk about. I think it's a key thing to like having this caregiving situation be a sustainable situation. So yeah. So what's your relationship with boundaries and how has that worked out? How do you feel about them?
Yeah. I want to just real quick say thank you for sharing all of that,
Yeah.
because I would guess that there are people listening right now who are nodding. Right. And so thank you for sharing how you feel about that. And that we're not just going to make this be like, boundaries are so easy, you should just do it. So my relationship with it, I feel like probably in the, I've been doing this caregiving thing for what, like 13 years. And yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
I think I've gotten better. I think that, I don't know that it was hard for me maybe ever, but I think that it's more just like, no, this is what I do. I don't know that I've ever thought about it in terms of this word boundary. So as in preparing for this, I was like, oh yeah, I guess that thing was, and that thing was, and whatever. I think an interesting thing for us to think about today is setting up boundaries in relationship to our person versus setting up boundaries in relationship to us.
Okay.
And I would guess that we caregivers, it's easier for us, not easy, but easier for us to set up a boundary that's going to protect our person, but not so good at setting up a boundary that's going to protect us.
Right.
Because same thing, like we caregivers are pretty good at like advocating for our person and doing all these things. But as soon as the tables are turned and we need to do it for our own selves, we're like, oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. I don't need that or whatever. And so I think that we can learn from the strategies, because it's probably going to be easier for us to set this up and to practice it on about our person. And then how can we transfer that to our own life? Right.
Yeah.
So I think when I was thinking about this, I was thinking a lot about the ring theory.
Yeah. Which is a boundary framework.
Yeah, exactly. And so for those who are new to that, it's sort of think about and it's not perfect, right? We know that. But it's like your person's in the, like picture a bullseye, person's in the middle, then probably we're the next one, and then who all are the next. And I love some people, I don't know if this was from one of the researchers, but some people call the people like way out looky-loos.
Okay, yeah.
Right? People just are like watching.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really important thing. And I think that to be like, because you might, like my next door neighbor might say, you know what I think you should be doing? For Sean, I think you should be going like all vegan or something. You know what I mean? Like that could be happening. And if I have in my brain a ring theory, I'm like, okay, Susie Q, like your ring 75.
Yeah, right.
So your opinion is at level 75, where my opinion is level 2.
Yeah.
Right. Or someone, I think I've given this example before. Someone before was like, my sister-in-law is giving all these opinions about what I should do with my husband and saying that I'm doing it wrong. And I was like, what percentage of time does your sister-in-law spend caring for your husband? And she said 0. And I was like, well, then that's how much of an opinion she gets to have. Now, I just said that as if that was really easy.
Yeah, right.
And it is not. But I think that that's like as we're, because we could be like, well, she's the sister. She should get an opinion. And I mean, she should.
Yeah.
But you, as the primary caregiver, it's almost like, can we picture like we're putting up a fence?
Yeah.
On the ring.
Right.
Around ring 1 and 2. And that we are the gatekeeper of what comes in and out of ring 1 and 2. And I think that we might be better putting the fence around the ring 1. But I want us to think today about also expanding it.
Right.
So that the fence is also around ring 2, which is us. And that we get to gatekeep the opinions, the energy, the things that come in towards us and our person. Right. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. And I think that too, as I was kind of reading about this, there's also like internal versus external boundaries, like boundaries that we set kind of for ourselves as far as what we're going to spend our energy on, and kind of how we, with our own selves, like we're going to silo this period of time for us to do this thing that we love. And I think those are the kind of boundaries that caregivers are not good at enforcing. And then external boundaries being much more kind of the things that you were kind of giving some examples of there. One thing that, as far as just to take it back to what are boundaries?
Yeah, please.
Something I read that was really helpful for me was describing boundaries as like your values, your needs, your preferences, all of that, like taking all of that and putting it into action. So like you feel that these are things that are important to you, and this is how you want the person you're caring for treated, and this is all of those kinds of things. And the boundaries are like, okay, we're going to make that happen. Like, we're going to try to make life as much as we can, because we can't control everything, but like, we're going to try to set things up to match so that our lived experience can be as close to what we truly value and want, kind of thing.
And need. I think you said the word need before
yes,
too.
Need, I think is a super important one. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. No, that's super helpful. So I'm even picturing, we talked about that gate, that fence, that wall, and that wall just having written all over it our values, our needs, our wants.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you're not going to come through this unless you sort of meet these values and needs. And so when I think about some examples of this.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I think about different times when, even like, so when Sean had his bone marrow transplant, and all of a sudden his parents were like, we're going to come, we're going to show up.
Yeah.
And I think I think for me, the hardest part around this is when like ring number 3 or ring number 4. And this is what I hear from a lot of caregivers. Like, if you're the spouse, but then like the parents or the siblings, they kind of think they're ring number 2.
Right.
Yeah. Or that we're all in ring number 2 together. And people can have different opinions about this, but I think that sometimes it's tricky because it's like, no, actually, I'm the closest,
right.
And so how can you, that to me feels like it's super easy to be like, neighbor, you're ring 75,
right. Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah.
It's harder for me when it's like ring 3 or 4, and you have to say like, okay, here's what my person needs. And you go, I totally understand why it's important for you to show up at this time. Of course, the reason that threw me off is, that I like schedules and plans, and it was like not planned. But I also like tried to put myself in their shoes and be like, they're 11 hours away and their child was about to go through this big thing.
Right.
2 of their children, right? Because the other one was the donor.
Yeah. Right.
And I get why they were like, you know what, we're coming. But I had to, in that moment, set up some boundaries around, okay, all right, you're coming. I get that. And, only this number of us are going to be in the room at a time. Only this thing. I'm going to be the one to talk to the doctors. If you have a question, it's going to go through me. You know what I mean? Like, some of those things. So I think it's important, like in those inner rings, to like, it's a good empathy exercise to like put ourselves in their shoes.
Right.
How might it feel to be the XYZ person in relationship to ring number 1? And then to ground ourselves back into, but I'm ring number 2, and what does my person and I need? Like, how can we hold both?
Yeah.
To not just be like, why would they be doing that? But instead to say, I understand why they're doing that. And what I and my person need right now is this. Right. So what's a boundary that we can set up that prioritizes their needs, but also keeps in mind a little bit of that empathy for those folks to say, like, I'm not going to totally box them out,
Right.
And I'm going to put up this boundary.
Yeah.
I think that otherwise, when I think about not having boundaries, I think about us sort of walking around on eggshells in a way, because we're just waiting. There's no fence up. We're just waiting for stuff to come flying at us.
Yeah.
Because like, maybe they'll show up anytime. Maybe they'll do this. Maybe they'll do that. Like, I don't know. But I just am living in this sort of uncertainty because I haven't said, please don't do that.
Right.
Please don't come now. Now, certainly we can set up a boundary and a person can blow that right away. Right. Yeah. Right. Just because you set it up doesn't mean it's going to work. But I think setting it up is the first step into sort of, as terrifying as it might feel for some of us to set those up, it might be more terrifying to be walking around and being like, at any moment, someone could just bust in. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, it does make sense. And it makes me think of something that I kind of was thinking through preparing for this is like, we can be proactive or we can be reactive with our boundaries. Like we can, if we're feeling stressed, if we're feeling resentment, if we're feeling burnout, like that can very well be a sign that like there are boundaries that need to be put into place. And I think that if you're in that situation, it can be difficult because you're going to have to push back against someone who has maybe been crossing a boundary and change the pattern that has been established. Whereas if you can anticipate what could be coming before there are issues and kind of like, to give an example, like maybe you're caring for a parent or your parents are aging,
Mhm.
and you can kind of see, okay, in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, this is kind of what things are going to start looking like.
Mhm.
This is the
Mhm.
kind of care they're going to need. And kind of think through, okay, what are going to be the boundaries, my boundaries with others, my boundaries between me and them,
Mhm.
and have those conversations earlier. So
Mhm.
it's hopefully
Mhm.
everyone can be going into that situation knowing kind of what you feel the dynamic needs to be for you
Yep.
to be able to do this. Feels like that's a much for someone like me,
Mhm.
a much more approachable way to
Sure.
kind of do that. And now that's not, we don't always have that opportunity
Mhm.
to kind of plan in that way.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times we are in situations where, with caregiving like this, a lot of us have been just thrown into this. It's just
Yep.
something that just something happened, and like we're here. And I think it's one of those things where we spend a certain period of time. There's a chapter of caregiving that is survival. And I
Mhm.
mean, in a lot of ways, the whole thing is survival.
Sure.
But you go through this phase of just trying to get through every day, of just trying to figure out how this like world turned upside down functions,
Yeah.
and like how to get through each day, how to do the things and all of
Yep.
that. And then you arrive at a point, and I think a lot of times it's due to you're feeling just burned out, you're feeling overwhelmed,
Mhm.
and you have to kind of start thinking past survival day to day and how to make this work long term.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's where a lot of people come up against, okay, boundaries need to happen. Boundaries are
Yep.
going to be part of that.
Yep.
And so you're coming into it noticing all of these areas where there's like friction between you and someone
Yep.
else.
Yep.
And okay, how do I set that boundary?
Yeah.
And again, for me, like that feels like a tough conversation to have.
Mhm.
And one way that I think can soften that is when you have that conversation with them. And this is like, people talk about this in having good communication anyway, in a lot of ways, is like I statements.
Yeah.
Like, I need
Yep.
to be the one to make the medical decisions for my person
Yep.
for this reason,
Yep.
or I need to have evenings free
Yep.
so that I can have time to unwind.
Yep.
Or like
Yep.
if it's between you and your person, which I think are probably some of the hardest boundaries to set, is like, I need to have all of your evening care stuff wrapped up by 8 p.m. so
Yeah.
that I can have an hour to read and just have some time for myself.
Yeah.
And to frame them that way, as far as like, you're expressing that this needs to happen to meet this need that you have,
Sure.
not like accusatory or
Sure.
just like coming at them.
Right.
But to kind
Right.
of give an explanation a little bit of like, you need this so that you can continue in this role.
Yeah. 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 Do you think in that situation, like if you're talking to, not if you're talking to your person, but if you're talking to someone in a bigger circle, that it's helpful to put it in terms of your person? Like, my person needs us to be like uninterrupted from 7 p.m. on. Do you know what I mean? Like, because again, ring 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 might respond better to that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Than if you say like, I need this house.
They're really like, well, okay, but what about the person? Like,
Right.
I feel like they would jump to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So framing it like the person needs that, or like I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think that also reinforces your role as the primary caregiver.
Right.
Like, you are the one, like the two of you are the inner circle or circles.
Yeah.
And like, we need this to keep going.
Right.
I think that's a really smart framing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you said something interesting about like the reactivity, right? That sometimes it's just like something happens overnight and we're like, whoa. And then we eventually maybe have a moment where we can kind of come up for air, and then we can assess the situation and be like, okay, what's working, what's not. But for some people, like, so for me, the very first thing that happened was this bone marrow transplant. So we had a couple of weeks maybe of like, okay, this thing is about to happen. Right. And sometimes I think that happens with a new diagnosis and you get this like treatment plan or whatever. And so you sort of, not that you've got lots of time, right? But you have a little bit of time to prepare. And so just that's, I think, a thing to think about is like, okay, if you're about to go into this season that you know is about to be particularly hard, what can you set in place to say, okay, we're about to do 35 days of radiation. Here are the things that, that would be helpful. Here are the things that, here's what we're going to need. Here's what they're going to need. Here's what, you know what I mean? Instead of just waiting to be like, I'm sure it'll be fine. Right. But setting that up and like worst case scenario, you never needed it anyway, but fine. So I hadn't thought about, until you said it, about the piece about the boundary between us and our person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like, let's dig into that for a minute and think about what that might look like. And I know that for some folks, like in my house, like Sean's like, I'm an open book. You can share anything. But that's not always the case.
Right.
Right. And so sometimes one of the players is like, sure, let's share. And the other player is not. And so then that might need to be a boundary about like, I don't want all my dirty laundry out there or my medical records or whatever. What are some other examples? And again, these are all hypothetical.
Right. Yes.
All hypothetical. But what are some other examples of things that you think might happen? And again, we can think about like, maybe it's you and a parent or you and a child or you and a spouse, you know what I mean? Like all different scenarios, but what are some other scenarios that might be a boundary that needs to be set between you and the person you're caring for?
Yeah. Maybe if it's, this could be a parent that's aging, maybe they're not even local, but like them calling you all of the time to just unload or just to, I don't know, need to discuss or go through things like maybe you don't have the emotional energy for all of that.
Yep.
That could be something. If it's someone who just at the onset of any amount of friction, like asks you for help. Whereas maybe there could be a boundary as far as setting them up to be more independent.
Sure.
So that, maybe it's a parent living alone. And so you get a call like, oh, I can't get this jar open.
Right.
I got to go over and open the jar for them.
Right.
Like,
right.
Whatever it is. Maybe that's, I think that kind of thing could be something.
Yeah. Let's take a quick second to say like let's go back to the phone call one. Cause I think that's a realist. Like I think that happens a lot. I think the jar thing actually does too, but like the phone thing. So what might that sound like to say, to set up a boundary around that? Like, is it, hey mom, I care about you so much and I want to know what's going on in your life. And, I'm working and my plate is full. And so how about this? I will check in with you every night at 7:00.
Yep.
And you can, if things happen during the day, you can just write them down. And at 7:00, we'll talk about them.
Right.
Now, certainly if there's a medical emergency, which might look like XYZ, you can call me. But otherwise, how about you write it down? And that way I can give you my full attention. I'll plan on it at 7:00. But if you call and I'm in the middle of a meeting, I can't really focus on what's going on.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like something like that.
That's great. Yeah. I thought for a minute you were going to ask me how to set that up. And I was like, oh,
I know,
boy.
I could tell you were like, no, thank you. So that's why I just jumped right in for you.
I appreciate that.
Yes, you're welcome.
That. Yeah. I think another example of like a boundary you may set between you and the person you're caring for is maybe there are certain, like maybe this is something where you're planning for an aging parent and like there are certain things that maybe you're not going to be comfortable with. Maybe that's like bathing or something like that. Maybe that's to protect their dignity or whatever it is. And so that could be a boundary. And another boundary could be like, maybe there's certain like medical stuff that you are just not comfortable with.
Yeah.
I read something that studies show that some of the most stressed caregivers are the ones who have to like operate like life sustaining equipment on their own.
Well,
which is like,
duh.
Right. And so maybe that's a situation where that there might be some of that. And maybe that's where you can move them to a facility that has some, maybe it's not a full like care facility, but has some assistance.
Or you get home health to come in.
Or you get
those
pieces. Exactly. And so that could be another thing.
Yeah.
I think that something we haven't touched on yet, but I think especially comes up with these feeling like you need to have boundaries with your person is guilt.
Yeah.
And I think that it's like you said, you're the neighbor who's in ring 75, you're not going to feel guilty about ignoring their opinion and, kind of walking away.
Well, some people might, but yeah.
Some people, but less so than
Yes.
feeling like we want to do everything we can for our person.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I think that guilt is a difficult piece to navigate through this.
Yep.
And I think one way we can, I mean, this isn't going to solve everything, but reframing things from like, well, I should be able to do this. I should be able to do that. Like I regret that I can't do that. I regret that it's not possible for me to do all of that. And still acknowledging that like you wish that like you had the capacity to do it all, but it's not that you should be doing it and you're not. It's just you can't. And kind of framing it from, I don't know, maybe more from guilt to grief a little bit, sort of. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but yeah.
I hear that. I also think I want us to not be like getting to the point of like, I can't physically do it before we set up a boundary.
Oh,
right.
Sure.
I feel like it could come like way sooner than that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? And so I don't want it to be like, okay, get to your like 99.9% capacity and then set a boundary. Like, let's set that way earlier.
Yes.
And in some of these conversations, I think the person might also, whether it's our ring one person or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, might also actually appreciate knowing, like having this conversation around, I can't remember what it was, but my daughter the other day was like, oh, I have this friend and they were doing, I can't remember what it was, but doing something. And I just said, hey, it feels really hard when you do that. I was wondering if instead you could XYZ. And she's like, and the next day my friend was like, started that, and because she just didn't know that was bothering her. But as soon as she said it, her friend was like, oh yeah, great. No problem. Right. And so I think for some of these things, it can feel really scary, but it might, it's sort of like with kids, they say, and with any of us, we feel safer when we kind of know the parameters.
Yeah.
And if, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are sort of like, am I injured? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And we say, let's just set it out there. Like everybody sort of is on the same page. And not everybody's going to like those pages that we just set up. But for some people, it might actually just make everything smoother because it's like, this is what we've established.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's interesting. I was going to kind of jump into, we were talking about boundaries, setting up boundaries. This is all important. But like, how do you like actually do it? Like, how do you communicate that? And then you give these examples where you just tell the person.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's really it.
Yeah.
It's true.
Not to say that's going to be easy, but yeah. And I think you're right that there can be so much like, I don't know if it's ambiguity or just like not knowing how people in these 3, 4, 5, 6 rings like relate to the person in the middle, like giving them some guidelines on how to operate. I think maybe not in all cases, but I think in many cases would be appreciated
for sure
to know how, because that helps them support you better.
Right. Yep. So I'm thinking, so even things like, let's say your person's in the hospital or your person's at home and is ill.
Yeah.
So even to set up some things, and if people have like a caring bridge or whatever, right, to say these things of, okay, visiting hours are from 8 to 8, but we're going to reserve X hour to X hour for just family time. The rest of you are welcome to come between da 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 da. If you want to come, please text us at this now. You know what I mean? Like just sort of set up what you want and what you need. I think another thing, like while we're talking about the hospitals, I think sometimes we need to set up boundaries with the medical staff.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's talk about that.
And so to remember that we are the customer and they have the degree, but we are our person's person. And so even thinking about things like we've set up things in the past of like, you know what? No medical students. Like they can be in the room. Right. And it kind of depends on the thing. But sometimes it's like we would have to go to an appointment and we would see the medical student and then we would see the fellow and then we would see, and we're like, we don't have that much energy to tell the story a bunch of times.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes to set up a boundary and say, look, here's the thing. No medical students, please. Yeah. Or even I remember when Sean had his transplant, there were people like a lot of noisy people in the hallway and his brother like went home and typed up a sign that said something like, to promote healing. We ask that you, and like stuck it on the outside of the door. Or you can say things like, when you come in the middle of the night to draw labs, we want you to use a flashlight and not have lights on, right? Like, so, this is also kind of borders on advocacy.
Yeah.
similar.
Right.
But I think that we need to think about, like, again, that we are sort of the gatekeeper for ourselves and our person, and that there's all types of people who might be trying to bust through that gate in ways that are not optimal for their healing.
Right.
And their well-being. And so I think that can also be staff and care and medical people. I think another huge one, and you alluded to this before, was about emotional dumping.
Yeah.
So when you think about the ring theory, it's all about comfort in, dump out.
Yeah.
And I think a big boundary, like we're talking about boundaries, like, are they showing up at the door? Are they whatever? Giving advice. I think those are big. But I think also there's the dumping, right? So if someone in ring 6 calls me up and cries and says, it's so hard for me to watch Sean going through this. Like, nope.
Yeah.
Nope. And so also, I think someone brought up the other day about, like, what about we caregivers who are friends with each other? And how can we have boundaries around, like you and I, like if we're like both in it, we're used to sharing our stuff with each other. But if you're having a really hard day and then I'm like, Justin, blah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so how can we even set up boundaries like that? And so for something like that, I think even to start the conversation with, hey, I need to vent. Do you have the capacity and time right now? Or is today not a good day?
Right.
Right. Easy.
Yeah.
Easy peasy. So that you can be like, I love you and I cannot today. Great. No problem.
Right.
That way you're not sitting there like, oh my gosh, Allison because there's this phrase called trauma dumping.
Yeah.
Like Allison just like trauma dumped on me and I cannot today. So whether it's about your person or maybe you just, because you're in this caregiving life, have sort of, this is a sad phrase, but like maybe a diminished capacity, right? Like maybe I can't take on all the things of all my people right now. Like I can't hear about this person who just whatever lost their job, which usually I would want to be all about, but I can't right now. And so maybe it's even that kind of boundary around just like, hey friends, just so you know, like I love you so much. And today I just don't have the capacity for this, but I hope that by next week I will. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because otherwise like resentment can creep in and be like, why are they telling me about their job? I can't, you know, but if I set that up and I said, I love you. And again, like I won't be able to be the friend to you that I want to be today, but next week I'll try again or something, you know?
Yeah. Thinking of stuff kind of like you alluded to there, that's like outside maybe our medical situation that we're in and boundaries around that. I think it could be another example would be like, you know, social things with friends.
Yeah.
And maybe they have this expectation that you're going to continue to be able to come to stuff and do things. Or maybe there's like, I don't know, maybe you have a friend who has a wedding coming up and you're expected to attend all these pre-wedding things and you can't, to like set that boundary that like, I have all of this other stuff going on and I do not have the energy or the time to do all of this stuff. And to set that expectation, I think is another place we face boundaries.
Yep.
I think another example that I just remembered that I was going to bring up is work. Boundaries between your work and your life outside of work.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one area where I feel like I've done well. And I've felt more or less fairly comfortable with that. I think that there have been multiple opportunities where I could be the kind of person who works more hours, or the opportunity was there had I wanted to work more hours to be available outside of the normal work hours. There are people who have made that choice and I don't understand it, but okay. But I have put up a pretty good, like, between these hours, it is work.
Yeah.
And once I'm off work, I am off work.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to, work happens again the next morning at 7:30.
Yeah.
That's when I will turn the computer on and deal with whatever is there.
Yeah.
And I think that was needed as part of helping survive the early years of Sarah being sick. And knowing that like her health, her whatever was more important than work, such that like, if she was having a bad day, like I would take the day off and be there with her. That kind of thing. And it could be things with work, like, you know, advocating for working from home more, or maybe you do need more flexibility. Maybe it's because of your situation, you need to be doing things periodically throughout the day. And so you need to set the expectation that you're not going to be 100% available between 8 and 5, but you're going to be in the evenings finishing out and kind of doing it there. Because for a lot of us, work is the other big piece of our life.
Sure.
And some of us can't be the case anymore.
Right.
Because simply the caregiving piece is too large.
Yeah.
But I think that's another area where, I mean, even if you're not a caregiver, having good boundaries between work and your non-work life is important.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm watching the time, and we're, we could talk about this for like 6 hours.
Oh yeah.
So
right.
just something I think that would be interesting for you to ponder in your heart is like, why has it been so easy for you to set boundaries around work and not other places? Or why does that feel like an easier space? You don't have to answer that. I just think it would be an interesting contemplative moment for you, because you're like, yeah, of course, duh.
Right.
But then in other places of your life, you're like, oh, thank you. Oh, that was such an amazing face you just made. You. One place, and I think this will move us into our conversation around supporters and what they can do, is about advice.
Yeah.
Oh, don't people just love to give advice?
They do.
And they love to tell you, like, I once knew someone. Right? And then I love when they're like, and now they died. Like, oh, cool. Thanks for the story.
Right. That's
Lucy, that was awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. So I think one thing we can do is say, and this actually happened early on, that someone in our life was recommending a lot of natural supplements.
Okay.
And finally I said, why don't you come to the appointment with us? And then you can ask the doctor about the efficacy of these natural products for Sean. And so they did. And then the doctor was like, oh, no, that can't. He can't take that because XYZ. And then they were like, oh. So, I mean, that was a bold move, right?
Yeah, right.
But I think I think that, sometimes it's that kind of thing, or we might need to just set up a boundary to say, we have done a lot of research on this. We feel confident in our treatment plan, or we feel confident in our medical team. And if we at any point need some extra support or like research or advice, we'll let you know.
Right. Or
even like, we know that many of you know people in your life who may have had this experience. At this moment, we're not, we're just living our own path and we're not, it's not serving us well to hear other stories. And so if at some point we want those, we'll let you know. But for right now, we would like to just focus on what's happening in our house. Before we go into supporters, how do you feel? Have you moved and a centimeter down the road in the last 44 minutes around around boundaries for yourself?
Right. Yeah. I think I felt throughout this conversation, I felt less discomfort than I anticipated going into it, which I think is good. I don't know if that's growth or whatever, but
for sure. For sure. Yeah.
No, it's been a good to talk about this. I don't know that I've sat down and talked about boundaries for 45 minutes before.
Right. Right.
And it's helpful. Good.
I think I want to bottom line this.
Yeah, let's do it.
A phrase that my mother-in-law used to always use. Bottom line. So the bottom line, I think, here is that to think about the ring theory as much as it supports you in your situation. And again, this doesn't have to be around medical things, right?
Yeah.
There's another ring in which you are ring number one.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. But so think about the ring theory. Think about sort of what you said about almost like a mission statement of what are you and your person, what are your needs, your wants, your values. And then imagine setting up a fence that has those words on it around ring number 2, around you both.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of before they can knock on the door that's in that fence, they need to meet those criteria.
Right.
And think about how it is protecting. It's not don't think of it as blocking them out, because you'll let them in if they meet the criteria.
Yeah. Right.
But think about how you and your person need as much support and protection and simplicity, right? And safety during this time as possible. And so you're setting that up to protect them and to protect you. And I think that the other piece is to include yourself, ring number 2, and not just put the gate around ring number 1.
Right.
But as I always say, you're part of the story as well. So put the gate around you as well. And what do you need? And maybe there are kids in the picture and you need to go out one more. And then what does the ring need to go around them?
Yeah, right.
Is there a boundary around don't talk to my kid about their sick dad? Right. Don't, like whatever. So I think to take those pieces in, and then I think to summarize around, like you said, sometimes you just got to say it.
Yeah,
I think always you just got to say it. And so sometimes preemptively you can say something, sometimes it's reactively, but really like important relationships have challenges, right? Like we got to work through them. And so, so that's anything else you want to add to our little summary before we get into supporters?
I think that's a great summary. I don't know that
Thank you.
I can add anything to that at the moment.
Okay, great. All right. So what would we want? I mean, we've kind of been talking about it, but from the flip side, what would we want from our supporters around this?
Yeah, a couple things. One is if a boundary is expressed, honor it. If no boundary has been expressed, maybe rather than making assumptions, ask like, hey, my uncle's neighbor went through this experience. Do you want to hear about it?
Sure.
The answer will probably be no. Don't assume that they want to. I think the word unsolicited comes to mind as far as advice, ideas about treatment, similar stories,
even visits,
right? Yeah. Think about that. Something specific that I think doesn't apply to all supporters, but maybe you're in ring number 3.
Sure.
Maybe you can have a conversation with the caregiver and maybe the person who's sick too, and be like, okay, what are the boundaries you want for the people in the expanding rings? And then be the point person to make that communication happen. Whether you're sending an email out to friends and family, or maybe you're managing the Caring Bridge and put a post up there.
Yep.
But to be potentially that focal point.
Yeah.
And to offer to do some of that communication, I think would be, for someone like me, would be a huge thing.
Oh, I see. So you're saying the supporter should offer that to ring number 2.
Like, hey, can I help you and support you by expressing to the greater group what your expectations, what your boundaries are. I think that would be beautiful.
That's amazing. Because then like you could be like, okay, well, I can say it to you, right? But then you don't have to be the one to say it. So then your uncle on the Caring Bridge says, okay, here are some boundaries we're setting up for the family.
Yep.
And you don't have to be the quote bad guy. Beautiful. I love that. Yeah. I think the other thing is like, we want to, like you said, don't assume. So don't assume either way, right? Like maybe somebody wants all the things. Maybe they want all the advice. And they're like, why is no one talking? So just ask. Like, I'm just wondering, like, what would be helpful to you? Would this be helpful? Would you rather I didn't tell you the story? Would you rather I didn't show up? Do you like it when I show up? But then just ask and just but don't assume either way that they do or don't want something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, even maybe a conversation between rings like 2, 3, 4, even as it applies together, to say, like, what are all of our roles? And ring 3 and 4, do you have boundaries that you want to set up?
Right. Yeah.
Like as the parents or the siblings or the whoever, like, are there things that you want to add to this, like, Caring Bridge that says, like, please don't put him on the prayer list because I haven't told all my people at church yet, or do you know what I mean? Like, what are those kind of things? So, yeah.
No, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like this is most of our conversations, this happens where, like, an hour from now, I'm going to be like, oh, and then there's this part. Oh, and then there's this part, right? Like, this is a big topic. And so we probably just scratched the surface, but I'm glad that we at least started.
Yeah. One last thing that I wanted to talk about, I think, but it didn't come up yet. I think that it's also possible that you could have set a boundary in the past that doesn't serve you anymore. Like maybe you just couldn't let other people into your situation. Like maybe you just needed to hunker down with your person and just move forward. And maybe like that is now preventing you from accepting help.
Oh, interesting.
or
Yeah.
from others, and is a boundary an area where we need to expand and let more in? Like, does that make sense? And I think that's specifically into like allowing help in, and because I think that can also be a difficult thing for caregivers, and maybe this is just kind of something for people to kind of ponder.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's a kind of reverse piece of this boundary thing as well, a little bit.
Sure. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it's true that, so instead of, we're not saying don't let anyone in, don't accept help. We're saying let people in and accept help in the way that works for you and your person.
Right.
And so, my thing is delegation is a form of self-care. And so do that in a way that meets that mission statement that we talked about, that meets your values and your needs and your wants. Not set up a wall and don't let anyone in. It's let them in the way that's going to work best for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. The other thing I'm realizing we didn't talk about is just about like when you set up a boundary and then someone just ignores it.
Right.
But I think sort of just like when I used to be a teacher, like you set up the rules, and then when the kid breaks the rule, you refer back to the rules.
Right. Yes.
And say, remember when we talked about that thing? And how, like it's really important. And so I think that at least if they break the boundary, you can go back to that conversation and say, we talked about that at one point. Here's why I said it, yada, yada. Right. So at least it's a step, quote, easier maybe than just if they break it and nothing was ever discussed, but just, I don't want in any way this conversation to make it sound like it's super easy and you just say the conversation and then everyone listens and everyone's happy and there's no drama. That's not really the way it works. And
maybe that's another area where ring 3 you can talk to ring 3 and be like, hey, this person in ring 4 is just like not respecting this boundary, and maybe they can be the one to sit them down and have a conversation. Like that would be another way to support that.
Yeah.
And then can I offer a closing thought?
Please.
We'll cut it off at this point, at this last random thought. In a lot of what I read, there was this continuing thing about you need to set these boundaries so that you can provide the best care possible to your person, so that you can do the best for your person, so that that can be the, that's the purpose of this. And I know we've talked about this in other areas, but like you can have boundaries and you can put those in place so that you can have what you need in your life, because you're human, because you're a person. Like you deserve that for yourself simply because of that. It's not that you need to do this so that you can provide better care. It's like you should be able to do this for you.
Preach.
And I just wanted to
thank you.
Tag that.
Yes. We need to say that every day.
Yeah.
Every day. And I will just add that sometimes as sometimes as caregivers, we have to like trick our brains. Right. So if the way to trick our brain is to say, okay, I'm going to set this boundary. Oh, that feels really hard, but I need to do it for my person. Right. If that's the way you have to trick your brain into it, fine. Right. But I think the deeper understanding we want you to have is you do it for yourself too, because you're worthy and you're deserving. Okay, goodbye. I'm done.
Okay.
Support group. This is going to be such a good support group. I can already feel it.
Good.
So check out the description. We'll tell you when the support group is, and we'll continue the conversation there.
All right.
Sorry for the long episode, guys.
No, this is good. Thanks for walking me through boundaries.
You are welcome.
The conversation.
Anytime. Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.